House No. 82 stood at the end of Maple Street, a two-story red brick home with a vine-covered porch, and had been Eleanor's companion for nearly 40 years. It had witnessed every moment of her life. The laughter of children echoing through its halls, cozy dinners by the fireplace, and even the silent tears she shed when her husband, Harold, passed away from a sudden stroke. Eleanor never imagined that one day she would feel like an uninvited guest in the very house she and Harold had built with all the love and sweat of a lifetime. 2 years ago, when her son Thomas and his wife Miranda lost their jobs due to a company shutdown, Eleanor didn't hesitate for a second to invite them to move in. "We're family," she had said back then, "and family doesn't let one another fall into hardship." She cleaned up the old living room, turned it into her own bedroom, and gave the master suite to the young couple. She even adjusted her entire schedule, avoiding the kitchen during peak hours so as not to disrupt their space. But none of her efforts ever seemed to be enough. Miranda was a modern woman, sharp and ambitious but seemingly lacking the patience to deal with the elderly. Eleanor understood they came from different worlds. But sometimes her daughter-in-law's coldness cut like a knife. Miranda never once called her Mom, only Mrs. Eleanor, as though she were a live-in maid. And Thomas, the boy who once held her hand through every childhood fever, had grown quiet. He didn't say much, never stood up to his wife, and no longer looked at his mother with the love he once did. Was it shame? Or just fear of confrontation? Meals became silent affairs. Eleanor always waited until the couple had finished before eating her own portion. The clink of her spoon against the plate echoed in the large kitchen, once filled with the joyful noise of family. On quiet nights, she would sit on the second-floor balcony, Harold's old favorite spot, watching the neighbors' windows go dark one by one. One night, she found herself whispering, "Harold, if only you were still here. Maybe everything would be different." And then came her 68th birthday. That morning, she rose early and went to the market to buy ingredients for a small dinner. Sweet potato pie, Harold's specialty for special occasions. She even bought red wine, Thomas's favorite, and decorated the table with fresh yellow roses. By 6 p.m., she had changed into a soft blue dress, brushed her hair, and dabbed on a little lipstick. She hoped just a little that today would be different. That Thomas would come out, embrace her, and say happy birthday. That Miranda might nod in acceptance and invite her to join the table. But instead, Thomas came out, glanced around the kitchen, and said quietly, Mom, Miranda and I need some space tonight. We've ordered takeout. You understand, right?" Before Eleanor could answer, Miranda chimed in from behind, casually, "We just want some privacy. It's a birthday after all, everyone wants a romantic evening, right?" Eleanor stood frozen. She looked at the carefully decorated table, the flickering candles. The once vibrant scene now felt hollow and oddly sad. "Of course," she said softly, forcing a smile. "I understand." She carried her plate of food, the wine glass, and the little pie into the kitchen, sitting on her familiar wooden chair. The kitchen light cast a pale glow across her face. Laughter and chatter from the living room drifted in, a painful reminder that she was no longer part of them. Eleanor's 68th birthday dinner had just one guest, herself. She bit into the pie and looked up at the ceiling. The cracks above seemed to whisper that nothing lasts forever. Her tears didn't fall from being abandoned, but from realizing even blood ties can fade, like the fading paint on old walls. And in that moment of absolute solitude, a small seed began to grow in Eleanor's mind. A quiet thought, but stronger than any pain. She would not live like this anymore. Not in her own home, where she had been pushed into the corners. Not as a shadow drifting through each day as if her existence was merely a polite obligation. And she knew, if anything was to change, she would have to take the wheel. No one else. The next morning, Eleanor rose early as usual, but something inside her had shifted. It was like how a night of rain peels away the old paint, revealing the true wall beneath. That feeling, it wasn't anger but clarity. She brewed her coffee just as she had for years, but this time she didn't add sugar. The bitterness was oddly comforting. Thomas and Miranda didn't say good morning. They left for work, the door slamming behind them as it always did. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, sipping the bitter coffee, watching the sunlight stream through the glass and fall on the half-eaten birthday cake still in its box. The memory of the night before was fresh. The forced smile, the extinguished candlelight, and the words that echoed in her chest. "We need some privacy, you understand, right?" Eleanor nodded to no one. "Yes, I understand now." As the sun climbed higher, she walked into her old bedroom, the room she once shared with Harold. Now it was just a storage space filled with forgotten things. But inside an old wooden chest, she kept what mattered most: family photos, property ownership documents, and a small leather-bound notebook where Harold had once written his notes about the house. She opened the notebook. The pages smelled of time. May 22nd, house officially in both our names. Eleanor drew a garden plan, wants to plant tulips. I'll build a white picket fence. October, Thomas learned to ride a bike. Fell 3 times in the front yard but didn't cry. Eleanor chuckled, tears sliding down her cheeks. So many memories lived here, every corner. Every scratch on the floor, all part of her life. Then, like a current running through her, she picked up the house deed still in her name, unchanged. "Homeowner," she murmured, lips pressed tight. "I am still the homeowner of this place." That day, Eleanor called Mr. Ray Hudson, an old friend of Harold's who used to work in real estate. "Ray, it's me. Eleanor Matthews." "Eleanor? My goodness, it's been so long. I heard about Harold, my condolences. What's going on?" "I want to sell the house, Ray." There was a pause on the other end. "Sell? But this house meant the world to you too." "I still love it, Ray. But right now I need to love myself more." That afternoon, Ray drove over. He walked a bit slower now, his hair silver, but his eyes just as sharp. "Do they know about this?" he asked, standing in the living room. Eleanor shook her head. "No. And I'm under no obligation to tell them." "Are you sure?" She looked around the crooked painting on the wall, Miranda's shoes scattered on the floor, the television blaring from upstairs. "Never been more sure." Ray began the appraisal. With the house located in a quiet neighborhood near a park and good schools, it was worth a solid price. It had history and Ray knew how to tell a story. Within a week, 3 serious buyers made offers. Eleanor chose a middle-aged couple, both retired, who wanted a peaceful home to share with their aging dog. They didn't haggle. They smiled warmly. And when Eleanor told them this was the house she had lived in her whole life, they promised to care for it as their own. The sale went through quickly. Eleanor received the full payment by bank transfer. It all happened quietly as she had been pushed out of her own family's life. While waiting for the paperwork to be finalized, Eleanor began packing. But she didn't tell Thomas or Miranda. She no longer felt the need to explain. Instead of confrontation, she chose to leave before another rejection, another cold glance. She left only one letter. "Dear Thomas, I once hoped this house would be the place you return to, not the place I would be pushed out of. I raised you with all the love I had, and now I'm keeping the rest for myself. Wishing you both happiness. Mom." On the morning of her move, Eleanor rented a small van. She packed a few boxes of books, some clothes, a few pieces of pottery, and one framed photo. Her and Harold standing at the front gate in 1983. She didn't say goodbye. She simply closed the door and left. Her new apartment was an hour's drive from the city, near the coast. From her small balcony, she could see the waves rolling in, seagulls gliding with the wind. That afternoon, for the first time in many years, Eleanor took a deep breath, not out of exhaustion but relief. No one walked into the kitchen while she cooked. No one checked the clock when she played classical music at noon. No one asked her to keep it down so we can focus. When night fell, she stood by the window, sipping hot tea, and whispered to herself once more, "Happy birthday, Eleanor. For the first time in years, you're finally with the one who matters most, yourself." Eleanor's new apartment was much smaller than the old house, but to her, it lacked nothing. For white-painted walls, one bedroom, a just-right kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the sea, it was enough. No one complained about her music. No one scolded her for leaving the windows open to let the ocean breeze in. She finally had a space of her own for the first time in years. In the mornings, Eleanor would walk along the beach. Soft white sand beneath her feet, waves lapping rhythmically like a lullaby luring her into peace. She started journaling again, something she had stopped doing after Harold passed. June 3rd. The sea is calm today. Cool breeze. I walked all the way to the rocky point. An old man, maybe 70, played the violin under a tree. The music was sad but hauntingly beautiful. Perhaps sorrow isn't so frightening once you learn how to sit with it. Eleanor spent her days reading, gardening in a few ceramic pots, and taking pottery classes at the local community center. She made friends with Edith, a widowed former teacher, and James, a man who loved telling stories of his travels around the world by ship. Her world had grown smaller, but somehow it felt more welcoming and gentle than ever before. Still, even in this peaceful life, Eleanor couldn't escape the dreams. In them, she was back in the old kitchen, holding the forgotten birthday cake. As she leaned forward to blow out the candle, Harold appeared across the table, smiling silently. "You did the right thing," he would whisper. She would wake up with tears on her pillow. The sorrow wasn't as sharp anymore, but it lingered, a piece of memory that never fully faded. One morning while making tea, she received a call from Ray Hudson. "Eleanor," he began with hesitation, "I need to tell you something. Yesterday, the new homeowners came to take possession of the house." Eleanor set her teacup down, her fingers tightening slightly. "Yes? And?" Can you imagine the look on Thomas and Miranda's faces when they opened the door to find police escorting the new owners in? "I wasn't there, but the neighbors told me." They were shocked, panicked, and of course furious. They had no idea the house was sold. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. A part of her felt relieved, as if a long-closed chapter had finally been sealed. But another part, the mother within her, ached. "Did Thomas say anything?" she asked. Ray sighed. "He called me 3 times last night. Furious. Demanded to know why you didn't tell him. I just said the truth. The house was still legally yours." Eleanor looked out to the ocean. The waves kept coming, indifferent to the storms in human hearts. That night she wrote a letter. "Dear Thomas, I heard you were surprised to find the house no longer yours. I'm sorry, not for selling it, but for letting things get to that point. I once believed I would always be your home, but you chose to push me out, and I had to learn to stand on my own. I hope one day you'll understand." She didn't send the letter. She tucked it into her journal, a message not for him but for herself. A week later, Eleanor decided to return to her old neighborhood, not to interfere, but to retrieve a few things she had forgotten: a painting Harold had done years ago, and a small music box from her mother. When the car pulled up in front of the old house, Eleanor paused for a few moments. The house looked the same, but something felt different. The bougainvillea out front had been trimmed back. The Matthews nameplate was gone. As she stepped out, a voice called out, "Mom? Is that you?" Thomas stood on the steps, hair messy, face tense. Miranda hovered behind him, her face flushed. "What did you do?" Thomas demanded, voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us? How could you do this to us?" Eleanor looked at her son, the man she once cradled through nightmares, now standing before her like a boy who'd lost his favorite toy. "Because I once said many things, but no one listened," she said softly. "Because I was pushed into the kitchen, treated like a burden. I had no other choice. That was still my home." Thomas cried. "No," Eleanor shook her head. "It was your father's and mine. Then I invited you in. But you didn't honor it. You forgot it was still mine. And you forgot who I was." The air was taut. Miranda turned away, silent. Thomas clenched his fists, then slowly relaxed them. Somewhere inside, perhaps, he knew she was right. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, opened her car, and took out the music box and the painting. "This is all I came for," she said gently. "Take care of each other if you're still together." Then she turned and walked away without looking back. When she returned to her apartment, Eleanor placed the music box on the shelf. She opened it. A soft melody played, the tune from a time long past. She smiled. Not because she had one, but because finally she had chosen herself. 1 month after Eleanor left her old home, she began to notice something strange. She no longer remembered what it felt like to live there. It wasn't due to fading memory, but because her mind had finally let go of the past. The yellow-painted walls, the oak table where she once helped Thomas with homework, the little stove that simmered winter soups, they were now only fragments of memory. warm but no longer binding. With each passing day, Eleanor settled more into her new life. She became a familiar face at the little bookstore at the end of the street, where the young clerk would set aside a few psychological novels, her favorite genre. Every Tuesday, she took pottery classes with Edith. The heavy lumps of clay that at first became lopsided mugs were now beginning to take firmer shape. The instructor once said, "Clay is like people, it needs to be shaped but not forced. You have to let it breathe." Eleanor thought maybe she was like clay, too once pressed too hard, now being reshaped into a different version of herself. Not perfect but finally true. One rainy afternoon, while organizing her desk, Eleanor reviewed her house sale documents just to ensure everything had been finalized. In the stack of papers, an envelope slipped out, a letter from Ray Hudson. "Eleanor, I don't know if you wish to stay in touch with the couple who bought your home, but they left a message. We thank you for entrusting us with this house. It truly feels like a home, not just because of the walls, but because the spirit of those who lived here still lingers. If you ever wish to visit, please don't hesitate. You're always welcome, like family." Eleanor held the letter gently, a warmth spreading through her chest. Strangers who had never known her had shown her more respect than those bound to her by blood. A few days later, she received a text from Ray. "Bad news. Thomas and Miranda have split up. She left last week. He's staying with a friend for now." Eleanor didn't react immediately. She set the phone down and sat by the window. No tears. No sighs. Just a quiet reflection. Was this the inevitable outcome? A relationship built on control, selfishness, and a lack of gratitude. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed. That evening, she played her favorite piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and wrote a handwritten letter. "Dear Thomas, I heard you're going through a difficult time. I'm not writing to judge. I'm writing to say if you need a place to pause, I'm still here. Not to lecture, not to comfort. Just as a mother, no longer angry, only full of love." This time she sent the letter. No hope, no expectations, just a small thread of reconnection. A week later, on a breezy summer morning, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Thomas, thinner, disheveled hair, tired eyes. "I read your letter," he said. Eleanor nodded silently, then stepped aside and opened the door wider. Thomas entered, his shoes damp from morning dew. The apartment smelled of ginger tea. Sunlight from the balcony poured into the room like a welcome. They sat. She poured tea. Silence reigned, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "I let you suffer too much." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She looked at her son, the man who was once the little boy she held while crossing the street. "I'm sorry too," she said gently. "For not speaking up sooner. For letting love turn into silence." Thomas lowered his head. A single tear slid down his cheek, the first she had seen from him since Harold died. "Do you regret selling the house?" he asked. "No," she answered firmly. "I didn't sell it out of anger. I sold it because I needed to let go. Sometimes, to save something, you have to set it free." Thomas nodded, eyes brimming, but this time with understanding. They shared breakfast on the balcony. The waves murmured softly. No need for many words. Some cracks can never fully heal, but you can learn to live with them. Like kintsugi pottery mended with gold, more beautiful for having been broken. The next day, Thomas left, not to return to the old house, but to a new city for a new job. Before leaving, he hugged his mother for the first time in years. "I promise not to let things slip away again." Eleanor smiled, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I don't need promises. I just need honesty." After the door closed behind him, Eleanor returned inside. She took the house sale contract from the drawer, placed it in a small glass frame, and hung it on the hallway wall. Beneath it, she wrote in black ink, "Not an ending, but the beginning of liberation." That morning, Eleanor returned to her old house, not to reclaim it, not to place blame, but to find closure. Ray had told her the new owners wanted to meet her one last time, to thank her in person for the decision that gave them what they called a sanctuary for the rest of our days. Eleanor brushed her hair, put on a deep blue coat she hadn't worn in years, and chose a pair of low-heeled shoes. She brought with her a vase of yellow tulips, the first flowers she and Harold had planted together in the garden. As she drove, glimmers of memory returned, the sound of little footsteps, Harold's voice calling, "Honey, I forgot the hammer," as he fixed the door, or the laughter that echoed through the house every Christmas. But this time there were no tears. Only gratitude. When the car stopped at the gate, Eleanor paused a moment. The house looked nearly unchanged. A new nameplate, the Henleys, now hung near the door. The bougainvillea by the porch was in full bloom. Everything looked tidy and bright, as if the house had been reborn. She stepped out, straightened her collar, and held the vase of tulips close. "Mrs. Henley opened the door, her face warm and radiant. "Mrs. Matthews, what an honor to have you. Please come in." Eleanor smiled and stepped inside, each footstep touching a layer of memory. The living room had been repainted in a creamy white, but the old chandelier she had chosen still hung in its place. The wall where Harold once displayed their wedding photo now held an oil painting of the ocean, yet somehow, it still felt familiar. Mrs. Henley placed the tulip vase in the center of the dining table. "We kept a few things like this table, for instance. It feels like it carries the soul of the house." Eleanor gently ran her fingers along the worn wood. A sense of peace washed over her. "Thank you both for loving this home," she said, her eyes glowing. "We don't just love it, Mr. Henley added from the kitchen doorway. "We're grateful. It's the peaceful final chapter of our lives." Just as Eleanor was preparing to leave, a police siren echoed faintly from the gate. She frowned. Mrs. Henley, however, didn't seem surprised. "That must be them," she whispered. Eleanor instinctively stepped outside and there, to her shock, saw Thomas standing at the gate, escorted by 2 police officers, his eyes wild with panic. "Wait! This is my house," he shouted. "I grew up here. There's been a mistake." One of the officers gently stopped him. "Sir, this house was legally transferred nearly 3 months ago. The new owners have all the proper documentation." Thomas looked around frantically until his eyes landed on Eleanor. She stood just a few steps away, between the porch and the tulip bed. Her coat billowed slightly in the breeze, her hair gently tousled. "Mom," Thomas whispered, barely believing his eyes. "You sold the house. You really?" "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly. "I did. But this was my home. I grew up here." "How could you?" "No," she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "This was your father's and my home. Then I invited you back. But you didn't appreciate it. You turned me into a stranger in my own sanctuary. And now it's no longer mine and certainly not yours. It has new owners now. And they know how to love it." A silence settled over the moment. The world seemed to hold its breath. Thomas stood frozen. Miranda wasn't with him. He stood alone, his fists clenched, then slowly loosening, his gaze falling to the familiar tiled path. The police didn't need to step in. Thomas didn't resist. He turned quietly, walking away. But just before stepping through the gate, he turned back. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Eleanor slowly nodded. "I forgave you before you even asked. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Some things, once broken, are best folded closed." Thomas bowed his head again, this time not in protest, but in acceptance, like a boy who knew he'd done wrong. After he disappeared from view, Mrs. Henley approached gently. "Would you like to come inside and sit for a while?" Eleanor shook her head with a gentle smile. "No. I think I've just said goodbye to this house for the last time. And this time I'm leaving in peace." On the way home, she stopped by a small seaside shop. In the display window was a hand-carved wooden frame with a dove in flight, and beneath it, the engraved words, "Sometimes to find yourself, you must let go of the place you once called home." Eleanor bought the frame and placed it beside her mother's old music box. That evening, she lit a small candle, poured herself a glass of wine, and played Clair de Lune. The candlelight shimmered through the glass, and the waves rolled gently in the distance, like a soft lullaby. No more tears. No more bitterness. Only herself, whole, complete, and free. Autumn arrived gently in the seaside town, leaves turning from green to golden yellow, then to fiery orange and red like little candles lighting up the sidewalks. Eleanor loved this season. There was something peaceful but not sad about it, like an old soul smiling back on life, full, unhurried, and without regret. Her apartment now bore the marks of her personality. Succulent plants lined the windowsill in neat rows. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft stripes across the floor. On the dining table sat a ceramic vase she had crafted herself, misshapen, but deeply loved. It reminded her that nothing needs to be perfect, and perhaps that's what makes life truly worth living. She adopted a small dog from the rescue shelter, big round brown eyes, speckled gray fur, and a habit of dozing off on her lap whenever it rained. She named him Button because he was tiny as a button and clung to her, as if afraid to be left behind. Each day, Eleanor walked Button around the park, stopping to chat with neighbors she once only nodded at. She discovered that when you truly stop to listen, everyone has a beautiful story to tell, whether it was about a tomato plant that wouldn't bear fruit, or a recently ended third marriage. Eleanor began to write. Not for publication. Just a journal. But this time she wasn't writing from loneliness. She wrote from gratitude. October 18th. I bought a new journal, linen-bound in soft blue. Each blank page is a promise to myself, to live every day fully. Not for anyone else. Not out of duty. Just because I deserve it. One morning while reading on the balcony, she received a letter. Not a bill. Not junk. A handwritten envelope in a slanted handwriting she knew well. A letter from Thomas. Mom, I've moved to Portland. Starting over isn't easy, but I'm learning to stand on my own. You once said that to save something, sometimes you have to let it go. I think I finally understand. Every day, I think about that breakfast on your balcony when you let me in without question or condition. Thank you for that. If you don't mind, I'd like to visit you this Christmas. Eleanor set the letter down and gently traced the edge of the paper. Beside her, Button stirred and looked up at her. Looks like we'll need a little Christmas tree, she said, smiling a true smile from deep within. December arrived early with the season's first cold winds. Eleanor began preparing for Christmas for the first time in years, not to fulfill a duty, but out of genuine desire. She strung lights on the balcony, hung a wreath on the door, and picked out a few ornaments for the tree she planned to buy the following week. On the 24th, Thomas arrived. He knocked with a large gift box in his arms, cheeks red from the cold, and eyes timid like a little boy. Mom, he said as she opened the door. I brought apple pie. And a long story. Eleanor said nothing. She just opened her arms and pulled her son into an embrace. That evening, mother and son shared dinner at the small wooden table, beside the tree adorned with paper stars and twinkling glass ornaments. Thomas told her about his new job, and the things he was learning from scratch, including how to cook and do laundry. You used to do all that for me without ever complaining, he said. Eleanor smiled. When we love someone, we give until we have nothing left for ourselves. It took me time to understand. Love needs boundaries too. Thomas bowed his head and softly said, I hope one day I can love someone as wisely as you have and still do. Dinner ended in laughter. Not loud or boisterous, but the kind of warm, familiar laughter that lights up a room. The next morning, with sunlight streaming through the windows, Eleanor stepped onto the balcony with a cup of warm tea. A gentle breeze blew. At her feet, Button was curled up, eyes half closed in sleep. Inside, Thomas still slept soundly on the sofa, wrapped in a green knitted blanket. She sat on her wicker chair and opened her journal. December 25th. This Christmas wasn't grand. No tall tree, no lavish feast. But I regained something I had once lost: connection. Not all relationships can be repaired. But if there's any magic in life, it's this. We can still find our way back to each other, if we're honest enough. I no longer live in the old red brick house, but I've built a new home with forgiveness, with understanding, with my own two hands, and I'm proud of that. That afternoon, the two of them walked Button along the shoreline. The waves whispered gently, and seagulls called in the distance. Thomas mentioned he was thinking of writing a family memoir, not to publish, but to better understand his roots. Eleanor nodded. You should. Knowing where you come from is the first step to knowing where you want to go. As the sun set, the three returned home. On the table were 3 mugs of hot cocoa and a card Eleanor had prepared, which she handed to her son. Thomas, I cannot change the past, but I can invite you to be part of my future if you wish. This apartment will always have a place for you. Not for shelter, but to build something together. Love, Mom. Thomas read it, looked up and smiled. I do, Mom. From the bottom of my heart. That night, Eleanor lit a small candle just like the first night she moved into her apartment. But this time she wasn't alone. In the soft golden glow, in that small room now full of warmth, she knew. She had finally come home, not by address, but by heart.